On this week's episode of Amari Purple Talk, an album of vault tracks mixed by Jam and Lewis was once discussed. Remix. Remembering the true king of rock and roll and more. Amari Purple Talk starts now. Welcome to episode 38 of Amari Purple Talk, a Prince podcast where I share my thoughts on the Prince musical singularity. I'm Richard Cole, your imagination funk soloist. Thanks once again for tuning in, and of course leave your comments where comments are displayed. Don't forget to download and listen from your favorite podcast platform, and if you're listening on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And with that out of the way, let's dive into our first topic. And our first topic is an album of vault tracks mixed by Jam and Lewis was once discussed. All right, so this goes back to interview with Jimmy Jam on Access Hollywood. And this was following Prince's passing on April 21st of 2016. And basically during that interview, he brought up a conversation that he had with Prince regarding the access to the vault. Let's see, now I've got some of the transcript from that interview. And this is what was actually said here. So it says, "We actually talked about that. And we told Prince we wanted to produce them. That was one of the things on our bucket list. And he laughed and he said, 'Okay, what would you do?' And I said, 'The first thing we do is we go down to the vault and we get all those great records and start working with those.' And he said, 'Okay, it's great music.'" Now, I didn't necessarily see the clip from this, so I'm just kind of reading the, like I said, transcript that was reported in the print article about this particular topic. And so I guess the context is, did Prince say okay as in okay, or was it like okay? But I'm guessing that the possibility was open. Now, granted, had this been a conversation, we don't know when this conversation actually took place, but let's assume this conversation definitely would not have taken place around 1986 or 87. Now, would it have taken place during the filming of Graffiti Bridge? I'm guessing probably not. But I would say or guess that around maybe after Prince got full control of his master recordings from Warner Brothers, that's a possibility. Because it does state in this as well that Jimmy Jam had not spoken to Prince within months of Prince's passing. So I'm assuming that this was a conversation that I would say at least at minimum took place maybe a year prior to the passing, but I would say definitely not any time during the late 80s or at any juncture during the 1990s. And I would say probably not until, like I said, my best guess is when Prince got control of his master recordings. And the reason I speculate on that particular time frame, it's because if you remember during the 90s, the sort of frustration that he had during his battle with Warner Brothers, one of the sort of bones of contention was actually the freedom to work with other artists. Now, he was able to do that once he left Warner Brothers. Best example of that would be the rave to the Joy Fantastic album, where he worked with Gwen Stefani. He got to work with Chuck D. Those are artists outside of the Purple framework, so to speak. Now, I can imagine that during a lot of those frustrations, since originally Prince wanted to do Graffiti Bridge on his own, he was also doing a time project with Morris Day, and that Warner Brothers was insistent that Jam and Lewis, well, the original time, Jesse Johnson included, insisted that they would be a part of any album or film participation. So I can kind of see around 1992 or so where, after that $100 million contract that Prince signed with Warner Brothers, that might be a suggestion. And I can see him vetoing that. That's why I say it's possibility that wouldn't come about. But since Prince, by 2014, has complete control of all of his master recordings, then I can see him being a bit more flexible, saying have Jam and Lewis come into Paisley Park. They go over the song selection, and they collaborate on, any overdubs or remixing for an album. So with that being said, I would say this would be a pretty good idea now. Because here's the thing. I myself, and I'm going to use Michael Jackson's Escape album as an example. While the planning and execution of that project, and for those that aren't familiar with that particular album, it's an album of unreleased Michael Jackson tracks that were remixed by the sort of producers of the day. So you had Timbaland, you had Rodney Jerkins. I forget some of the other producers on that project. But bottom line is that if you go and listen to that album, it sounds like it was recorded yesterday. And that album was released in 2014, which was about 15 years after Michael's passing. So even though that album did go platinum, it did spawn a top 10 hit, and it sounds great, it's creepy as hell. Because again, it's 15 years after his passing. And like I said, it sounds, like he recorded it in the year 2014. Now, selling point to the diehard fans, there was a version in which you got both the remix stuff and then you had the original tracks. And the fans were more interested in the original tracks. Now, in regards to a Jam and Lewis produced compilation of vault tracks, this is what I would like to see happen. Do not update it for 2020 at all. And I know for, the way Jam and Lewis produce, I don't know, it might not be a bad thing because their strength lies into, okay, let's look at what made an artist successful in the first place. Or if they see what wasn't working, then they really try to get into that artist's head and really kind of draw out the things that do work and make that successful. So I can see in a way where with Prince, it wouldn't be a thing of trying to make it 2020. But then again, Prince was always about looking forward as well. But I would say the challenge would be, and the example of that would be, seek out Marvin Gaye's Hear My Dear, the expanded edition, in which the bonus material are remixes of the album. And let's see, there are remixes by Kanye West. There's a remix done by Questlove. There's a track that was remixed by Bootsy Collins. One of my favorite remixes is Marcus Miller's remix of Anger. Now, the challenge put forth by the executive producers of this project was that it was to include no new overdubs, no changing of anything to make it sound like, current or contemporary, or try to make it, appeal to the hip hop crowd, or make it appeal to, the house music crowd or whatever. It was taking what was already there on those original master recordings, or the original tapes, and coming up with a unique mix based on what was already there. And, listening to that, there's some things that I enjoy better than the original album. For instance, like I said, Marcus Miller's remix of Anger is superb. The last song on the album, or not the last song, but Falling in Love Again, I enjoyed that mix slightly better than the original mix. Let's see, You Can Leave But It's Going to Cost You, that mix on the remix version I like better than the original album. But I mean, it doesn't distract from the historical context of what the Hear My Dear album was. But like I said, I enjoyed the challenge of, like I said, them not trying to, they didn't put an 808, they didn't replace the drums with an 808 or any type of drum machine. It was just like, oh, okay, this is a drum track that wasn't used on the final master, so let's utilize that. Or, here's some background vocals that you could manipulate or you could work with to make it different. But like I said, it was just basically using what was already there, what was already recorded, not adding anything different. Now, depending on the track, yeah, if you can take, say, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, Terry on bass, Jimmy on the keyboards, or if there's something there to where it's like, okay, yeah, Prince's drumming is great on that, but let's get Morris in, to make it different. Now, that kind of flexibility I would be cool with, not for the entire project, but if there's a song that warrants that, by all means do it. But I would like it better if it was the trained ears of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis just manipulating what's already there to bring out something in that performance. So in a way, it's almost as if, in a way, they're producing Prince, but at the same time, it's that thing of they're letting Prince be who he is in essence. And I think it would work. I really think it would work. Like I said, if for those of you that have Tidal, or I don't know if it's on Spotify, or, check it out on Apple Music. If you have the subscription to Apple Music, go ahead, seek it out. If you're a Marvin Gaye aficionado and you should already have this in your collection, or you should already have heard it, but if you haven't, definitely, by all means, check that out. But just to kind of see what I'm talking about as far as those producers assigned to the tracks that they were given. Now, granted, the Questlove one I was slightly disappointed with, because I guess in essence, there's Questlove's fingerprint on that track, but it's more of, I guess kind of what his taste would be is that sort of fly on the wall in the studio experience. So it's more of that than really trying to improve on the track that he worked on. And that's Sparrow, which is a very personal favorite. You know, I used to sing that one to my daughter as a lullaby a bit, you know, when she was a baby. So it was kind of that sort of my personal thing with that one. But yeah, and hence the disappointment that it's like, well, I like the original mix better. But like I said, his fingerprint is on it, and it's a pretty good job on it. But like I said, that's more reflective of what his tastes are. You know, he likes those vault tracks, you know, or kind of make it sound vaulty or get that raw vault experience out of it. But overall, like I said, by all means, check out the expanded edition and compare notes, you know, because they did a great job working with what they had, each and every producer. So anyway, but like I said, that's the kind of thing I would like to see if the estate decides to do a project like that. Like I said, I don't want to see, you know, or I don't want to hear, you know, Pharrell. As much as I enjoy Pharrell and his production, as much as I love Timbaland and his production, I don't necessarily want to hear like, you know, Prince is all of a sudden in 2020 and like he recorded it, you know, yesterday, or he's about to go into the studio next week and record it. But if you use your ears as the mixing producer, then using whatever elements to bring out or even bring more so to the surface of what's already there. And I would say, I don't know, you know, Prince's thing was that there's a lot of stuff that's unfinished to, you know, from his point of view. But again, like I said, if you can manipulate certain elements, and that's not to say you can't do a re-edit, you know, instead of just, okay, well, I'm going to take the song if it's 10 minutes long and, you know, just say, drop out the bass. Or I'm going to accentuate the bass and, okay, there's like 5 guitars on there. I'm only going to keep 2, but it's still going to be a 10-minute song. If there's something in your style, and especially, you know, the more hip hop experienced producers, you know, I would say, you know, get a, you know, yeah, bring in a Jazzy Jeff, you know, bring in a DJ Premier. And again, let them mix those elements in a way just like hip hop to where it evolves into something new, but it's done within the elements of what's already there. And again, we don't need the 808 on top of it unless it's already there. But like I said, if that's something that I would like to see or hear happen from the estate. So what do you guys think about that? I know I'm not a big fan of, like I said, I heard Escape, and it's great to listen to, but it's still creepy. So would you like to see an album like that from Prince where it's the producers of the day? Or would you put it in the care of a Jam and Lewis and let them just bring out the essence of it, or put the challenge to a Pharrell or a Timbaland or whoever's happening right now and, you know, take those elements that are already there and edit it and sample it into something and, you know, cut and scratch it in a way that it's going to bring out something new and original from what's already there? Let me know. Leave me a comment and let me know your thoughts. And now let's move to our next topic. And that topic is called Echoes of Baltimore. And May 10th marks the 5th anniversary of the release of the song Baltimore, which was written specifically for what happened to Freddie Gray. He was murdered while in police custody. The tragedy set off a series of protests throughout Baltimore, quite similar to the protests that broke out in Ferguson and throughout St. Louis following what happened to Michael Brown as well a couple of years prior. About 2 weeks after the protests, Prince performed a special concert in Boston, which he also debuted the song Baltimore as well. And that was an hour of that was live streamed on Tidal. I was unable to catch the live stream for that performance, but let's see, I do have Rolling Stone's coverage of the event. And basically, the song Baltimore, we think about a lot of sort of, anthems or things that have become anthems throughout the 60s and 70s. Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud is one. What's Going On. Anything by Curtis Mayfield, from People Get Ready, Moving On Up, the entire Superfly soundtrack. If there's a hell below, we're all gonna go. But Prince is not without his fair share of anthems as well. Sign of the Times is definitely something that obviously keeps reoccurring. But Baltimore was definitely of the moment. It's a decisive moment of a song, and it's not unlike anything that John Lennon would have done, say, around 1972, or even earlier. Revolution was reactionary. Give Peace a Chance was in the moment, but things like his Sometime in New York City album, that was of the moment. But Baltimore is kind of like on the lines of that, to where a lot of us get it. We got the song. It's not up there with, What's Going On, but, we're not comparing songs or anything like that, but taking advantage of those moments. And here we are 5 years later, and basically, here we are again. And here we are again with the recent murder of Ahmaud Arbery. And, for those of us that are not, or my listeners that are not in the United States, basically Ahmaud Arbery was taking a jog through a neighborhood. Two white men, one of them being a so-called ex-police officer, decided that this was a person that was fitting the description of someone that was committing a string of robberies within that neighborhood. But they decided to try to take the law into their own hands, resulting in the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. Now, initially, these two gentlemen were not indicted. There were no charges that were filed, but a video of the killing has surfaced, resulting in their apprehension. And so the investigation is now afoot. So, like I said, here we are once again. And, and this, news of, like I said, this has been 2 months that have gone by with no justice that was brought. At least there was no swift justice that was brought. And of course, the wheels of investigation and indictments are coming on the weekend of an anniversary of this song, Baltimore. And, like I said, the song is not, like I said, it's not remembered in, so-called Prince history, as a bona fide classic. Like I said, if you want, say, protest songs or memorable protest songs, Sign of the Times is probably, the one that ranks with what's going on. It ranks, with the people get ready sort of thing, where these songs, 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, 50 years later, are still having some relevance with that. And, I remember initially the song itself caused a little bit of division with in regards to Freddie Gray. I even had a bit of a Facebook feud of sorts with someone. Now, granted, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but the beauty of having differing opinions is that if both sides listen, then the goal is to come to an understanding of what's going on. Now, at the end of the day, if you can agree to disagree, that's one thing. But if every ounce of fact is met with sarcasm, if it's to cover up a sort of lack of understanding, then let's put it this way: it's racism of another color. And I don't know, I'll leave it at this. There are people that live in a certain environment and they may have sympathy for your situation without ever having been in the shoes of an individual or group. And there are people that are so blindly conditioned and hopelessly dependent upon whatever system they're in that they'll just blindly defend that position. And there are some people that are just plain downright ignorant. So hopefully what I'm about to say next will help either bring some enlightenment or some understanding. Because I get it. And I've said it myself about Prince as a musician. His greatness is always taken for granted. And that's just due to the visual image, the perception. If this was a cat that was, say, maybe afroed up, had some locks, natural, hair. If he rocked his natural hair from all the way through the career and there were no high heels or lace involved, then, maybe on a lot of things we would have listened a little bit harder, or we wouldn't have taken it for granted as much. For all the party anthems, for all the sensual anthems, brother had a lot to say from day one, and a lot of us, that have been there since day one are even playing catch up like, okay, yeah, he was deep. And if anyone that has read The Beautiful Ones, talk about the curtain being pulled back and totally revealed, even with just a mere 50 pages. And even just through the context of that book's introduction itself. This, yes, the goal is for all of humanity to get along. But here's the thing. Like I said, for those that are sitting in their respective environments, look at your particular culture's history, you know. And chances are, even say if a lot of you live within the United States of America and identify yourself by the laws of this country being designated as an American citizen, you know, look at your cultural history and how you're able to trace it back. And those that have taught you, whether it's parents, grandparents, and so on and so forth, other relatives that say, hey, yes, you do live here in America, but, you know, are your great grandparents or your grandparent, your parent, whatever, came from this country or that country. You know, this country was started in whenever, or this country was well before the time of Christ, and we had this spiritual system, and you know where it goes. And chances are, 9 times out of 10, those parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on and so forth found their way to this country more so voluntarily. Meanwhile, there is only one group of people that did not find their way here voluntarily. And before anybody goes into that was 400 years ago and so forth, let me paint a picture of the ripple effect. And basically, the ripple effect is anything where the flashpoint, regardless of whatever time in history, if it's not dealt with responsibly, then that ripple effect has serious ramifications. So let's put it to you this way. Let's start with the so-called Dark Ages, where the way to education stopped at the Catholic Church. Remember, reading, writing, that was banned. And to a lot of Europeans, reading and writing was considered magic once upon a time. So and that was a few hundred years or so until the Renaissance. And granted, that was the flashpoint of rebellion on a religious level, but the ripple effect is that there was so much information kept in the dark for X number of years that if certain information that was revealed to you, even though there are certain ancestors that may have been privy to it prior to the Dark Ages, if that information was revealed to you now, it would be a difficult pill to swallow. The same, or I would say the second Dark Ages would be the age of the American slave trade, in which people were systematically blocked from reading and writing and a certain level of understanding for so many years that there's a disenfranchisement that still continues to this day. See, the Emancipation Proclamation did not necessarily include a strategy that would allow those slaves and their descendants a detailed way to integrate them into American society. Now, Reconstruction was put in place as a way to reintegrate the South with the North. So meaning that because the South lost, these are the guidelines you now have to follow in order for America to be one unified country all over again. But again, it did not include a detailed strategy for any slaves or their descendants. However, Reconstruction did produce the first black congressman into the United States government. And a couple of them were from the South. And one of the programs, and you'll see where I'm getting with this, one of the programs per the guidelines of Reconstruction was to come up with basically a public school system. Now, this wasn't a public school system just for blacks. This was for anyone living in the South. The problem was getting the poor whites on board with this system, because they had been conditioned by the couple of 100 years of slavery. They were conditioned to believe that they were superior. And this idiotic conditioning more than likely rose from Pope Nicholas V's 1452 Dum Diversus, or as it's known as the Romanus Pontifex from 1454, which permits the perpetual servitude of Saracens and pagans in Africa, and were justly used to justify enslavement of natives and the appropriation of their lands during this era. Now, the transatlantic slave trade was initiated at the request of Bishop Lacassus and authorized by Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, in 1517. So, like I said, the seeds of this, ripple effect. Two rednecks decide to go grab a couple of shotguns and hunt down a black man minding his own business. So ripple effect. This keeps happening over and over and over. And again, regardless of the environment that you come from, yes, we should all be in harmony. Yes, we should all try to get along. And if that's what you do, cool. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to have love for one another. Chances are you wouldn't be listening to this program if you didn't subscribe to that philosophy. And that was Prince's philosophy too. But also, again, in order to kind of get to that plateau, we as black people have to clean up our own backyards too and get on the same page. And that way we can better join in this harmony. That we got to start with ourselves as well. And what I'm saying about that is that we're not free. This is why this keeps happening. If, say a movie like, say, The Godfather comes out, and there were Italians that were heavily pissed at this movie. I enjoy watching it. It's a classic film. One of the greatest films of all time. But it paints a picture of the same picture that Hollywood has been painting over and over. They've made the gangster something glamorous. From the Jimmy Cagney movies to, some of the earlier films that Humphrey Bogart was in. George C. Scott, all of those cats, playing mobsters, playing gangsters, The Life of Al Capone and Public Enemy and all these films, the original Scarface. I'm not talking about the 1981 remake. I'm talking about the one from 1934. But by the time The Godfather came out, that painted such a portrait, such a picture that was impactful. Like I said, it's one of the greatest movies of all time. So hence the impact. But they can get together and say, hey, this does not represent the totality of Italian life. Let's take a look at the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Now, per terms of surrender by the Japanese in 1945, the United States occupied Japan for quite a while. But the Japanese didn't march, they didn't protest, they didn't riot, they didn't even resort to name calling, at least not out loud anyway. They may have done it amongst themselves, but they didn't even bother to call a name. They sat back as a culture, studied the way America works, and became an economic powerhouse by the 1980s. So much so that there's probably a lot of you out there that isn't aware that anything that said Columbia or CBS Records or Columbia Pictures, it was an American company until Sony bought it. A lot of real estate in New York was purchased by the Japanese. I mean, they stepped up, Sony itself stepped up its game in the electronics field. You know, the automobile system, you know, the Toyotas, the Hondas, you know, they were a major threat to American car companies. So they didn't, like I said, they didn't march, they didn't riot. You know, yeah, it's like, cool, all right, we lost the war. But they became such an economic powerhouse that they were able to step to the United States government and say, hey, you remember those, Japanese that were living in America as, bona fide United States citizens, Americans that you just rounded up and threw into camps because you thought they were spies or this or that. Well, I think those that are still living and their descendants deserve a little compensation for that. Hence, they were given reparations. Black people to this day are still having the discussion of reparations. And the transatlantic slave trade was a whole hell of a lot longer than any Japanese internment camps. It was a hell of a lot longer than any Holocaust. Now that doesn't say, to me, one life is too many. But that being said, again, unified as a culture, now in Germany, there are classes, that teach the evils of the Holocaust so Germany does not repeat that same mistake again. That's the weight of what a culture can do. And us as Black people, as African Americans, there are some African countries that are still so separate and not on the same page that our voice doesn't carry the same weight as the two examples that, I just mentioned. And Prince was somebody that was definitely well aware of that, and granted, there's stages of growth. There's stages of evolution. Like I said, when I was a kid, it was almost as if, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud was required listening. I've got Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver on my bookshelf. I've read the autobiography of Malcolm X. But what I know now versus as a kid, or a teenager, or even my 20s and 30s, it's a quantum leap. And, same thing with Prince's level of understanding. Yes, there was a feeling of pride. There was a level of understanding, Hence having a band like The Revolution that was similar to Sly and the Family Stone. The message that imparts, that yes, there can be harmony, there can be unity, amongst races, amongst genders, and that should be promoted. But as time goes by, for every advancement, there's still this perception. There's still this racism, whether it's overt in the blatant murder of someone, whether it's systematic or institutional, or just simply because someone lacks understanding. In that case, it doesn't mean that they're evil. It's just that because they lack a certain understanding, that ignorance can cause just as much harm as any physical violence or any institutionalized racism can, perpetuate as well. So, he was well aware of that. And even probably through what he's had to deal with in gaining his emancipation from Warner Brothers. Yes, it's music, it's master recordings. Yes, it's the ownership of art. But again, that institutionalized racism and probably some of the ridiculous things that he's heard or experienced. It's like, nah, okay, show me the door. Let me own my stuff. That way I can have some type of economic leverage. I've got spiritual leverage. I can now educate younger people coming through this business, and I own my stuff. That's what it comes down to. That's the beauty. Like I said, for those listeners around the world, that's the beauty of your culture. You own your economic situation. Not to say that you don't own a company or anything like that, but you have people within your culture that do, that can either raise you up or inspire you to reach that plateau as well, and let you know that there's no ceiling. There's no one that can stop you. There's no one against you. And if someone is against you, you got us behind you. That's what's missing with our fragmentation. It's like Malcolm X said, if we were Americans, there would have been no need for an Emancipation Proclamation. If we were already Americans, there would be no need for, a 14th Amendment. If we were Americans, there would be no need for a civil rights bill or the right to vote or anything, because we would already be integrated within the fabric of society and recognized and respected and treated as such. And anything, if it's just down to basic good versus evil, you're dealing with that individual just on that level. And you just not out because you just blatantly either just hate somebody or you just don't fucking understand. And that's why, Prince felt like a song like Baltimore was still needed. It's, then it was 2015, 2014. It's still needed, despite the fact that there was a Martin Luther King that was fighting. There was a Malcolm X that was fighting for the people, that there was a Kennedy that was out there, two, for that matter. For all that sacrifice, for all of those ancestors that have suffered and gone through whatever, that in 2014, okay, cool, we can eat at the same restaurant. Okay, here it is 2020. Cool, we can all just go to the same bathroom, whatever. But there's still people out there that just hate with so much ignorant hate to just do that and to just, again, walk, just walk. There's people that shoot up and they get Burger King afterwards. That's something that's very, very sick with that system. And I think what Prince tried to do was to do a song quietly, like in a way that what's going on was quiet. But it spoke volumes to the human condition. Not just the song itself, the entire album of what's going on itself spoke volumes. The kids that sort of got turned on by watching Superfly, the message wasn't in the character of Priest. The message was what Curtis Mayfield was putting down on the soundtrack. I mean, granted, I loved Superfly as a kid, but the damage, the influence that was done, because it's like, oh, it's the drug dealer. He's the hero of the piece. But without that Curtis Mayfield soundtrack, I'm sorry, that movie would suck. Big time. Honestly. Like I said, I enjoyed it as a kid. I can still watch it now and appreciate it for what it was and what it was trying to do. But I'm sorry. The message was in every single note and lyric that Curtis Mayfield put down on that entire soundtrack. That's what elevated that movie from a movie that without that soundtrack, or if it had anybody else doing the music, it would suck. At least with that soundtrack, it passes off as a work of art. But if you separate the album and just listen to the album itself, like I said, it still stands today. All of it, So I'm going to move on here. I'm going to read a statement that Prince made at the concert in Baltimore. And I think it's still relevant today. It's something that still needs to happen. So this is what was said by Prince at that concert in Baltimore. And what he says is that the system is broken. It's going to take young people to fix it. We need new ideas, new life. Most of all, we need new peace. And the kind of peace I'm talking about is spelled Piece. Next time I come to Baltimore, I want to stay in a hotel owned by one of you. I want to play in a building owned and operated by one of you. I'm talking to the young people now. And that's what it's going to take. I do see this generation, where the schools are more integrated, with the internet and everything. The world has become, in its own way, a lot smaller. And when stuff like this happens, they're shocked. Just their ideas. They're not thinking so much as Democrat, Republican so much. They're really going after the person that they feel is going to do the job. And granted, that's a whole nother topic of conversation, but just on a surface level, what folks say my age or even older are still conditioned again by the same process. And it's that sort of blindly following sort of mentality and not questioning, why is it only these two? Why can't we go after the person that is legitimately going to fix this? It's like, don't even get them out of those two anymore. Just find the person that is the most qualified to fix it or to do whatever. And really make it feel like the people are involved. Because at least on that particular level, no, not a lot of people feel that involved. And, and especially if the wind is taken out of the younger generation sells, where it's like who they strongly feel is best, then they're just not going to do it. They're just not going to vote, And, and I know, and I guess that's the thing too, it's that whole generation thing, where the youngsters of the 60s and 70s rebelling against the older generations, whether it was about Vietnam or, race or other things. The thing is that no, they're telling us that no, we need somebody that's real in there, not playing the same old game of politics in it, so there's sort of that. And like I said, my age, older, they're playing that same game, oh, it's, I'm Democrat or I'm Republican or I'm damn that, it's like, because it's not helping at this point, and things are really getting out of hand, where I've always said, just piggybacking off of Prince's statement of not giving in to entropy. Don't give in to entropy. Don't get swept up in this madness. Think for yourself. Ask some questions. Do your own homework. Yes, you can emotionally react to something, but don't let that emotion control you to the point you're not thinking. Because, there are a lot of things that are going on, and a lot of decisions, as you've seen, were made without your consent. So, and it's affecting a lot of livelihoods, and those that are, able to kind of adapt and roll with the changes, it's taking an emotional toll. It's taking a spiritual toll. So you got to hold on to those things. Again, like the song says, hold on to your soul. We got a long way to go with that. But yeah, it's going to take the younger generations and, as far as, like I said, cleaning up our own backyard, we have to own our educational structure, which is, if I had younger kids, this would have been perfect for me, because it's like, yes, this is my opportunity to teach it. Yes, hats off and salute to all the teachers out there. And we know you're not always given the best tools or the most adequate of tools or nothing at all, or breaking it down to the individual, not the ones that are legitimately making a difference, but those that are just kind of blindly passing out certain information. As a parent, this is a golden opportunity to teach your children the truth, and do that and give them something that, that they'll remember out of this for a long while. So there's that. But yes, we have to own our educational structure, because a lot of it is broken, not necessarily, the suburban system or the private school, but the inner city, the public school system in a lot of places is still broken, and it needs to be fixed. And we need to take charge of that and really make sure that those kids are getting the best competitive tools out there. And, our, ownership. Granted, yes, the civil rights did what it did, but I believe it was at the sacrifice of ownership. And it's always this fight to be integrated, or it's the fight for affirmative action. Now, granted, those tools are necessary in order to give the best qualified a fighting chance, not just to open the door and just let some idiot through. It's designed that, hey, if this brother, this sister is the absolute most qualified, then given that things aren't equal, then if this system is necessary to put in place, then by all means, do it. But if we owned our own economic structures, we owned our own businesses or owned more of our own opportunities, then we got a better shot. And like I said, we can sit at the table with every other culture, and then we can all work together on making this planet a much better place to do. And our own spiritual system, own that. You know, majority of your Italians are Catholic because since 3rd century AD, that's the system they set up. It's like, Constantine said, okay, I'm converting to Christianity, y'all, and this is the system we're going to set up. There it is. Same thing, Islam, Judaism. We gotta, as a people, decide what, there's Buddhism, Hinduism. As a culture, we gotta decide what we're going to do because everybody's fragmented. And decide where, what the history is and go beyond slavery. Black history didn't start with slavery. There's hundreds of thousands of years of history that's there, and the information's out there. Go check it out, and like I always say, make up your own mind, see how it integrates into your own system. If it's relevant, cool. If not, like I said, at least you got a different level of understanding, so when there's an opposing view, guys can sit at the table peacefully and understand it. So, like I said, Prince tried to come at us quietly with Baltimore. It's a quiet song. It makes one hell of a point. No justice, no peace. But like I said, he could have come out with the angry anthem. But we've got, in recent history, we've got some Public Enemy out there. We've got some KRS-One out there. Go back and bring those back. And, you youngsters that are, whatever, whether you respect the history of hip hop or not, we, like I said, it's cool to get down and dance and have a good time, but, we need some balance because there's so much going on and there's so much against us. And you're probably, if you're thinking that because a record company signs you to whatever type of deal and you get to walk around in the video, or you get to walk around on TMZ with big wads of cash in your hand, and you think you're free now, nah, it don't matter. Granted, Ahmaud Arbery could have been jogging or running in a Giorgio Armani suit, and the same thing would have happened. Trust me, the same thing would have happened if he was wearing a Giorgio Armani suit. There's no waiting to stop and see. Sometimes if, you're so-and-so and you play for, the San Francisco 49ers. Sometimes there's no slowdown enough to sort that out. Or you're so-and-so and my kid sees your video on YouTube every day, and he's got all of your CDs, or he's downloaded your last album just yesterday. Sometimes there's no slowdown for that. And let's put it this way, there's a lot of us that don't play for anybody's football or basketball team, to which owner of said team or owner of said stadium can make a phone call, and miraculously you're bailed out. Not a lot of us get that luxury. So my point is that while you so-called repping, then think about those that have been unjustly, those that are, that made the choice not to do wrong, but to try to elevate, or they are elevated, and yet murdered while minding their own business. We need somebody to speak up and speak out about that. You know, we need that back. You know, like I said, it's cool to party and get down. Like I said, hey, you know, we had what's going on, but we also had James getting down on the good foot. But that was right after he said, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." You know, we had Curtis Mayfield, but, you know, Jackson 5 were giving us the ABC, and they gave us Dancing Machine too. You know, we had that balance. Hip hop itself was a rebellion against the extravagance of disco and the sort of extravagance of big stadium tours like Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones. Because especially in New York, the system cut out school music programs. So there were no more instruments to put into the hands of these kids. So as creative as we are as people, 2 turntables and a microphone, change the world with it. And for every hip to the hippie to hip hop stop, for every one of those, there's a 1989, another number, another summer. Get down, sound of the funky drummer. You know, Elvis was a hero to most, but he never meant shit to millions. He was simple, racist, and plain. So motherfuck him and John Wayne. So we need that balance back into the equation. So, to the last beat, to the last band, to the last bass, we funk. And we're going to end this topic, and we're going to move on to our Purple Spotlight. And our Purple Spotlight highlights, well, a Prince album, film, video, or an associated artist. But we're going to flip the script today and put the Purple Spotlight on the originator, the emancipator, the actual architect. Scratch all that, as Questlove would say. This is the true king of rock and roll. And I'm talking about the one and only Richard Penniman. The Little Richard. The true king of rock and roll, who passed on Saturday, May 10th. And, you know, there's a generation of us. We weren't around in the 50s. You know, we were born in the mid and late 60s. But, you know, if we were in the presence of our parents' televisions or our grandparents' televisions, and Little Richard would be on the TV, I know somebody put it that was the scariest thing ever. And that person was right. It was like, you were just taken back. What is this? But, you know, we all heard Tutti Frutti. And, you know, to us, it was kind of no different than any, you know, nursery song that kids would sing. It would just kind of rank up there because we didn't know. You know, we didn't know what the history was. We didn't know the impact. We just knew, dang, this dude crazy. But it's like you were just drawn in because it's like, oh, well, he sings, you know, he plays piano, okay, it sounds good. Oh, there's Tutti Frutti, and that's kind of catchy and that type of thing. But at some point, you learn the history, you learn the impact, and this man literally invented rock and roll. And you can give Chuck Berry a close second, if not a tie. But, you know, granted, as far as musicianship, yes. And maybe with the style of songwriting, yes, Chuck Berry did change the world. And, you know, it put George Harrison on the map as a guitar player. It put Keith Richards on the map as a guitar player, and any other rock guitarist in that era owes Chuck Berry their entire careers, and a lot of the British ones will tell you so. A lot of the American ones will play a little coy about it, but definitely, the British ones give it up all the time. It's like, it's black music, and that's what did it for us, and we hadn't looked back since, is what they will tell you. But Little Richard, though, yeah, when Tutti Frutti dropped way back in 55, it took off like wildfire. But because he was marginalized as a black entertainer, the older white folks, they weren't trying to have it. They were, he wasn't performing at their venues. They weren't letting their kids listen to it. But that's the thing about rock and roll. Rock and roll, kind of like jazz, as jazz was gaining momentum in the 20s, the older the older white folks were like, nah, we're not having this stuff. And that's probably where the term "we're not having this jazz" came from, is that they were trying to stop their kids from listening to jazz. And the kids were like, we're jitterbugging to this stuff all day, every day. Same thing with rock and roll, but with probably a bigger impact and a grip that I'd say it's holding on in some areas, but I would say basically Little Richard to me is the actual big bang to the universe that is music now, or through now. Anybody and everybody, regardless of your genre now, and I mean as far as if you're rock, if you're R&B, if you're hip hop, if you're pop, you owe an incredible debt to Little Richard. And that's, like I said, Prince, David Bowie, Elton John. It's like I saw an old interview with Elton John, and I guess he tried to play a little coy about, there's no one that influenced me or whatever. But it's like, dude, the flamboyant outfits, if it wasn't Little Richard, you got it from Liberace. But let's just say you are in rock and roll. You was rocking in the 70s. You had the slow songs too, but basically you came with some rock and roll. You came with some funk with Benny and the Jets. So therefore, if Little Richard didn't exist, you wouldn't exist, and you wouldn't have been wearing the Donald Duck costumes and the Queen, the Marie Antoinette outfits. Nothing. There would be nobody, no James, no Sly. And there's interviews, he will tell you that. And he says he's not conceited, he's convinced. And, the Beatles, Paul McCartney, there'd been no Beatles, without, Little Richards. It's like the Beatles opened up for Little Richard when Brian Epstein brought him over to England and was performing in, Germany and Liverpool and all over Europe. And the Beatles were the opening act. They hadn't quite had their first record out even. And they were opening up for him. And they're backstage and, Little Richard's reading them Bible verses. And, Paul's like, how do you do that? And Little Richard taught him how to do that. Woo! Like that. So, that impact is just amazing, just like that. I know kind of as started with, because I don't know, prior to me wanting to do music, I was more of a music listener, music fan. As an artist, I never really thought about doing music, as an expression of art. I had guitars, but didn't really take it seriously until like later teenage years. But as a music listener, and And this was sort of through buying the Beatles rock and roll compilation album. And it was just basically a bunch of their covers of 50 songs, some of their earlier material, and I think it was a 2-record set, and just the final side of the second album kind of had their heavier stuff, like Get Back and Helter Skelter, Back in the USSR, that type of stuff on it. But the rest of it was kind of that, if it wasn't covers of 50 songs, it was their, rock, it was kind of their rock and roll with those 50s influences kind of updated for, whatever, 1964, 1965 or whatever. But that album, and maybe watching Happy Days, sort of opened the door for me to want to explore what was going on musically in the 50s, because for me, that early mid 70s, it was the Jackson 5, it was James Brown, Sly and the Family Stone, Earth, Wind and Fire, Stevie Wonder, maybe the older stuff I heard was more blues, like B.B. King, Bobby Blue Bland, that type of stuff. Maybe probably some Jerry Butler here and there too, but that was sort of my scope musically. But like I said, between watching Happy Days and that Beatles rock and roll compilation, then it's like, oh, well, what's this music of the 50s about? So I found a radio station that was playing that 50s, kind of early, mid, barely late 60s stuff. And I was like, cool, and started reading, finding books in the library about rock and roll and stuff, and seeing who the major players are. And like I said, at the very beginning, you've got Little Richard, you got Chuck Berry. And the thing with Little Richard was that with Tutti Frutti, and this was sort of an industry standard at one point, where, again, there was a segment or large segments of America at that time that didn't want their children listening to black music in any way, shape, or form. The South, if you had a TV show that had a black person, especially like these variety shows, and if you had a black person, or even in the case of Nat King Cole, he had his own television show, they didn't want to see a black person on television even. So a lot of these shows would have a short shelf life, or they'd say, we don't want the black guy on. And some shows would be like, well, screw you, we're going to have him on anyway. Or some would cave under the pressure. So that being said, same thing with records or radio. So the industry standard at that time was, if you were a black artist and you had a hit song, in order for it to sell to the white crowd, then you had, or basically they would get somebody like, say, for example, Pat Boone to cover your song. And if you look at a lot of documentaries on rock and roll, they'll show you that contrast, and they'll point that fact out, because they'll show you Little Richard singing Tutti Frutti, and then they'll show you Pat Boone singing Tutti Frutti. And trust me, there's no contest whatsoever. It's Little Richard hands down. And there were lots of white kids that would agree with you, and they bought the original record. And as Little Richard say, they brought Pat Boone in the house, but they put me in the drawer. So there's that. And Elvis too, both Pat Boone and Elvis had big hits on Tutti Frutti, but that opened the door for Little Richard to come on through, and came in with Long Tall Sally and Rip It Up. And like I said, the rest, any note that was played or sung and you called yourself a rock and roll singer, or basically anything that was considered rock and roll in the 50s and 60s, regardless of who you were, be it Elvis, be it Buddy Holly, be it the Beatles, be it the Drifters, be it the Temptations, be it the Supremes, be it, Wilson Pickett, be it James Brown, be it Sly and the Family Stone, be it Jimi Hendrix, who played on stage with Little Richard in his early career, played on two of Little Richard's singles during that career. And the story is that Little Richard kicked Jimmy out of the group because it's like, I'm the star. You can't be bigger than me, because that talent within Jimmy was there from day one. And it took a while for the rest of the world to catch up, but people were taking notice. And if you don't think that what you see on those Jimi Hendrix album covers or those clips, if you don't see that connection, because it's like, oh, well, let me dress like this. Now, Jimi Hendrix wasn't putting on pancake makeup, but, Prince did. David Bowie did. Glam rock, Mark Bolan, all those cats, I can just go on and on. Like I said, anybody that has played a note or sung a note that calls themselves rock and roll or soul or funk, even hip hop. Like I said, Little Richard is the big bang of this musical universe that we get to experience today. And everybody, any and everybody that we enjoy, because let's put it this way, if, there was no Little Richard, then, Elvis would be doing the damn Louisiana hayride in the South, So there would be nothing to cross over to the mainstream for the, nobody could use him as a vehicle because there would have been no black music. I mean, yeah, you might have had Ray Charles, but then, like I said, you probably would have maybe had a Sam Cooke, maybe a Temptations, and it would just be some cats wearing some suits. Still sounding good, but like I said, Little Richard is the big bang to this musical universe that we enjoy now. So let's just have a brief moment of silence. Let's also have a moment for Andre Harrell, who was once part of the rap duo Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but went on to be an executive for Def Jam, and then from there started his own label, Uptown, which brought us Mary J. Blige, which brought us Heavy D, which brought us Puffy, which brought us Jodeci. I mean, I can just go on and on, but basically, Teddy Riley and Guy. My late 80s and 90s, early to mid 90s, man, has just been Thanos snapped yesterday. I mean, we lost Heavy D a few years earlier. Again, it's like for a lot of the just people that aren't celebrities, the brothers that aren't celebrities, and sisters too, let's not forget Sandra Bland as well, but the people that have just been taken away senselessly, there's been a lot of people that, just all in their 50s, it's just been like, they're just not here anymore. A lot of these rappers and music artists, But let's, for Little Richard, the true king of rock and roll, and for Andre Harrell, who brought immense culture to the 90s. Let's give them both a moment of silence. All right, Little Richard, Andre Harrell, All right, you guys have taken whole steps to Hotep. And with Little Richard, I know it was Saturday night, just got paid. Rule about your money, don't try to save. Hearts say don't go half the time, but it was Saturday night. You were feeling fine. And right now in the spirit realm, you ripping it up. And Andre Harrell, man, like I said, there's so many. But true genius of rap, much love and peace, bro. And that is going to end this episode of Amari Purple Talk. And again, don't forget to download this episode, previous episodes, future episodes, download and listen. And if you're listening on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and definitely hit that notification bell. And gonna have some different stuff coming. We'll still keep rolling with Amari Purple Talk as long as I can keep coming up with ideas for topics. And also just some little segments about other aspects of music, or I should say just non-Prince music, will be coming up as well. Also check out my blog, What's in the Crate. That's on WordPress. So I got the link in the show notes here to that. I'm kind of behind. I've got 2 new blogs that I'm working on. One is Lakeside's Your Wish Is My Command album and the Beatles Revolver. So look out for those. I'm going to definitely finish those this week. And also 2, there's also Amari merchandise. Be sure and check that out as well. Also be sure to follow me on social media. On Twitter, it's at RichardCole_now. And on Instagram, it's RichardCole_Amari. You can see how those are configured in the show notes. So definitely go on your respective social media. Follow me there. Facebook. Thanks for all of the different comments regarding last week's topic of should Under the Cherry Moon be released in color. A lot of you, please listen to the episode. Please. The rest of you, thanks for your opinions. I know there's a bunch of yays and a bunch of nays, and that's good. You guys are entitled, because movies, music, it's all subjective. But definitely thanks for commenting all the way around. So keep that going as well. And we'll see you back here next week. And as always, keep it purple and on the one.